There ain't no future unless we build it now. It's the future, y'all. It's the future. There ain't no future unless we build it now. United States, Africa, we salute ya. A new state of mind, I introduce ya. Close your eyes and visualize the rise of a new paradigm. Solar powered skyscrapers.
Welcome to the Africa Must Unite podcast, a podcast dedicated to inspiring African people worldwide to rise up, organize, and struggle for Pan-Africanism, a unified, liberated, socialist Africa, the only permanent solution to the exploitation and oppression of African people, no matter where they happen to be born or happen to live in the world. Now please, welcome the hosts of Africa Must Unite.
Africa's future is now, so get ready.
Greetings. Welcome to our 15th, right, Melvin?
Our 15th podcast.
All right, Africa Must Unite podcast number 15. I am Mama D.
I'm Brother Melvin.
And we are the Pan-African Revolutionary Socialist Party. And we are happy to be here. And as always, we like to start off with important dates in our calendar. This is March. And so let's see what has happened historically in regard to progressive revolutionary people and especially African people. So on March 4th, Mississippi elects Blanche K. Bruce as U.S. Senator in 1875. He was the first African senator elected,
First
wasn't
African,
he?
yep.
Also on this date, Zinzi Miriam Makeba, South African singer-activist, was born in 1932. On March 6th, Ghana gained political independence from British colonialism in 1957. And on March 8th, Harriet Tubman, slave liberator scout, was born in 1820. On the 9th of March, Plessy versus Ferguson legalized U.S. apartheid practices in 1896. We were just talking to the children about that.
Yeah, just studying that piece, separate but equal doctrine.
And on the 13th, People's Revolutionary Government of Grenada was established in 1979. Also on this date, Lillian Ngoyi, member of the Executive Committee of the African National Congress in South Africa, died in 1980. On the 14th, Fannie Lou Hamer died in 1977. On the 16th, the Organization of Mozambican Women was formed in 1973. On the 19th, France defeated by National Liberation Front of Algeria in 1962 after 8 years of war and over 1 million Africans killed. On the 21st, the Sharpeville Massacre, South African police gunned down peaceful demonstrators against the passed laws in 1960. And on the 23rd, Walter Rodney, Pan-Africanist, author, historian, and revolutionary, was born in 1942. We study him still, don't we?
Still doing that. How Europe Underdeveloped Africa.
Classic work, isn't
very
it?
classic. Still studying that. Suggest everybody go out and grab that one.
All right. And on the 24th, African students rose up against neocolonialism, closing the University of Madagascar in 1971. On the 25th, Ida B. Wells died in 1931. And on the 26th, our brother Ahmed Sekou Touré died in 1984, a major contributor to Pan-Africanism, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And lastly, but not least, Shirley Graham Du Bois, person in her own right, author and Pan-Africanist, died in 1977.
Yep, so those are our critical dates for the month of March. Also for this month, our calendar theme is Our Enemy is Capitalism. So part of our calendar, we always have a piece dedicated for the theme. So to go into that, there's a quote from Malcolm X that we start with, and Malcolm states that if you show me a capitalist, and I'll show you a bloodsucker. Capitalism, an economic system under which the means of production For example, the factories, tools, equipment, machines, and the mineral resources, etc., are owned and controlled by a few, the capitalist class, who live off the labor, the exploitation of the workers for the maximization of capitalist profit. Capitalism in all of its manifestations, slavery, colonialism, neocolonialism, and Zionism, is the major evil confronting the exploited and oppressed peoples of the earth and threatens the future existence of our planet. It not only exploits our labor, but also oppresses us based on our nationality, racism, and our gender. Thus, our primary enemy is capitalism, and it must be destroyed. Kwame Nkrumah further states in more letters from the Conakry years, the imperialists and neocolonialists must know that we are not asleep. We know they are our enemies, and we must prepare to face them anyhow, in whatever way we choose.
And that's the truth. We definitely got to do that because we got to talk about who our enemy is, because we still have different views of that, even as African people all over the world. And if we're going to wage a war and free ourselves, we got to get on the same page. Isn't that right, Mel?
Absolutely. We have to deal with the question of enemy because African people can't move forward to solve the exploitation and the oppression that they experience without knowing who or what is causing the problems. In other words, in knowing who our enemy is. It's a question second only to identity. Who are we? Who are we as a people? What or who is primarily causing us our problems? That's the enemy question right there. Mm-hmm. And then how do we solve those problems? These are the questions that must come in that order. We start with our identity. Who are we? Very important for us to be able to identify that. Who is our enemy? Then our objective. How do we struggle against that enemy? So on the question of enemy, which is the focus for this week, so many different responses that we can get in that we typically get from our people. However, the response that you hear quite often is that our enemy is white people.
Yeah, and that's something, and that's understandable. I mean, that's the first starting place, I think, because when you look around and you see, who the ruling class look like, right, and you facing racism and all of that. I mean, that's the first place you're going to go. But we use a historical materialist analysis, our philosophy. We'll talk about this in another podcast. It's philosophical consignism. And so our belief, like in Nkrumah's and others, is that the enemy is the exploitative or exploitative economic system of capitalism in all of its forms. Whether you talk about slavery, feudalism, colonialism, we'll talk about that. But we believe that we're not born racist or domineering. We're not born exploiters and oppressors. In fact, Melvin, humans have to learn most everything. You see a newborn baby and, we're social beings and we have to almost be taught everything. And it's this old saying, you put an infant in a cave with wolves, she or he'll howl like a wolf, walk on all fours like a wolf, right, and eat like a wolf. Mm-hmm. In fact, even hot and cold, you got to teach children. They learn by experience, right, what is what. And so we say, it's the economic system that is primary in a human's life because, that is what allows us to survive. It provides us food, shelter, and clothing, and we couldn't live without that. Right. And so since that's primary, it determines how, depending on how we are arranged to produce in that economic system, that will determine our political and social realities. It shapes our consciousness, how we might think about beauty, intelligence, and more, depending on, who's ruling the society. Mm-hmm. So, we always say, Melvin, when we study and we talk, we say a fair economic system, one in which all work and all people work and who can and are able, and the wealth generated from that work is used for all the people. This kind of economic system will generate and promote fair ideas primarily, ideas of justice and equality. We've seen economic systems that have existed or hopefully coming into existence, like communalism, socialism, communism. And on the other hand, an unfair economic system like capitalism, one in which the majority of the people work and only a small percent of the people who don't work reap the lion's share of the wealth that is generated. That's an unfair economic system and will primarily promote unfair ideas like racism, sexism, and we've seen and we know and we've been affected in horrible ways as African people by these systems: slavery, feudalism, capitalism, colonialism, neo-colonialism. And you know, some more Michelle, that's what we're reading right now,
Right.
Melvin. You know, it's
Establishing people's power.
yeah. He's one of the people who offers, I think, one of the most concise, clearest explanation of what happened. That we all start off as early humans in a communal way. Our concern is for survival, and we provide for our basic needs, living on roots and wild fruit and all of that. And we just produce enough to survive. And then at a certain point when we begin to use tools and we move to agriculture and animal husbandry. So let me just read this short section from some more Michelle. He says, and I quote, "The existence of surplus production provides the material basis, the objective conditions for forces to emerge in society that seek to appropriate the surpluses to the detriment of those who have produced them. The society divides into opposing classes with different interests. Some want to appropriate, that is, to claim ownership over the fruit of the labor of others, while the latter object. Human relations, which have until now been cooperative, become relations of conflict between exploiters and exploited. Obviously," he says, "this whole process took hundreds of thousands of years. Opposing interests, antagonistic classes did not grow overnight, but the process is fundamental." And Melvin, I like his word fundamental. I mean, here Michelle is clear. It's not the human-born exploitative or racist. It's the economic reality that is the fundamental problem. If it's not based on collective production, you know, everybody's working and everyone shares in the fruits of the labor, you know. So that becomes key. And why we always say there's the economic system that determines major ideas. And if you got unfair ideas like racism going on, that means you have an unfair economic system that reigns supreme. And we're saying that today is capitalism.
Right. And just to go back a little bit in terms of how those, what gave rise to capitalism, how we get to this point where we in a capitalist reality. Now we have to understand how slavery, what we experienced here in the U.S., was that foundational piece that gave rise to capitalism, that vicious exploitation of man on man, where the ruling class viciously exploited the human capital, the labor of the African here in the U.S. for obviously that profit reality. But that comes out, what's the feudal lords, right? What are we talking, 16, 1700s?
Yeah, I mean,
Europe?
that, especially you're really talking Europe.
Right.
Enslavement for us, wasn't it?
Right, enslavement for us. But feudalism in Europe, where the feudal lords, the ruling class there, were the landlords and had the serf, which was their exploited class. They're the serfs that were working the land, but still for the profit of the feudal, that ruling class.
And that's why we say it's capitalism in all its forms. Whether you talk about embryonic, the embryo form of capitalism, when you're talking about slavery and feudalism, or different manifestations, still, if you're seeing a small percent of the population owning and controlling and everybody else working, that's an unfair economic system, and you won't have racism and sexism. And, we talked about capitalism at the beginning, and then imperialism. in which you talk about is really the catch-all word, Melvin, for particular forms of capitalism. And in consignism, Nkrumah calls imperialism the highest form of capitalism. And in our glossary, we define it as capitalism expanded, the economic domination and therefore the political and social domination of one nation by another nation in the interest of the ruling class, the capitalist class in the dominant nation. And there are several forms of imperialism: colonialism, settler colonialism, and neocolonialism. And today, what you find happening mostly is the neocolonialism, especially at home and in Africa. And I just want to read what Kwame Nkrumah says about neocolonialism. It's a powerful statement, Melvin, that he made. We could really read more of it in his book, Neocolonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism, that he published in 1965. But he also does this real concise description of it in this speech. It's called What is Neocolonialism and How Does It Work? And it was a speech made by Kwame Nkrumah at the opening of the Second Conference of African Journalists on November 11th, 1963. And he says, what is neocolonialism? It is the situation we find in a country where colonial power grants nominal, in name only, political independence to a territory, but sees to it that the control of the economic arrangements of the territory are still in the hands of the ex-colonial power, which is thereby able to dominate its economy and indirectly the state apparatus. It is empire building without the flag, and this is how it works. Number one, he says, the neocolonialists see to it that the political power remains in the hands of indigenous reactionaries. Melvin, you know, that's just people who look like you and me,
right,
but who act in the interests of the enemy, the neocolonialists. Number two, they maneuver to control the army, the police, and even the intelligence services. Number three, Nkrumah says, they see to it that the economic institutions of the country are in the hands of their agents, and that economic production is completely controlled by private foreign capital, leaving only the less profitable infrastructure in the hands of the indigenous population. Number four, they divide the trade union and other popular movements. Five, when they have gained full control in this way of a client or puppet state with a client or puppet administration, then they are in a position to do what they like in the territory, its government, and its people. If they, this is number six, the last point he makes, if they cannot get their own way, Melvin, then they engineer political and military coups to overthrow the regimes and install new reactionary regimes which will carry out their orders. And we see that, you know, we could see that going on today and what's happening in Venezuela. But it's a good description of neocolonialism, and that's what's going on today. And, you know, you got many other kinds of or forms of imperialism. We just want to talk about and have guests come on to talk about neocolonialism. But we've known colonialism in Africa, how the enemy sat over in Berlin.
Right. The Berlin Conference.
In Germany with a map of Africa.
And carved up the continent.
Carved up 1884, 1885, talking about we'll take this, you'll take that. And it's so vicious, you know, because they even separated people. That the example of separating the Wolof people, those in the Gambia and those in Senegal, one people, you know, and the French colonized Senegal, you know, and then the British colonizes the Gambia. So, you know, that's just one country due to their military power subjugating and taking over another country in order to take advantage of the natural resources and the labor of the people. of the subjugated country. They really don't move there for any other reason. They just bring their colonial apparatus in to extract the wealth, and they bring a military in to ensure that they keep the people down and while they're exploiting and stealing the wealth. But then you got settler colonialism.
Right.
That is something, isn't it? Where you come over, you commit genocide, put the indigenous people on the reservation or something, and you claim, you take over the land and claim it, you know.
So we've seen that in South Africa, right?
Man.
Australia, even settler colonialism. Definitely here in the U.S.
And that's the thing, sometimes, we ask the young people now, where have you seen settler colonialism occur? And they don't think about the U.S.,
Don't think about the US.
but
Yeah,
Native Americans, land all stolen from them. And you got these people today talking about, this is our land. They came from Europe, and they say, this is our land, So you have these other realities, but the monstrous one that we want to have a chance to talk about is neocolonialism and how it's operating in the world. And just following through on what Nkrumah said, how the neocolonialists get in there. He described it, Melvin, as colonialists coming back and slinking through the door. It's just a backhand way of exploitation, because you put in power a puppet government or somebody who is going to do your bidding.
Right.
So that person might be president of an African country. He looks like you. He looks like me, or she looks like me. But you really don't have any economic or political control over your country, because you got to do the bidding of the neocolonialists, and that's what it exists now. And just if we have 1 second to deal with this whole business of the last point that Nkrumah brings up, and that is that if nothing else works in terms of neocolonialism and how it works, if nothing else works, then you engineer a coup, or you set up a reactionary regime. And this book, this is an old book, it's by William Blum. You remember this, called Killing Hope, the U.S. military and CIA intervention since World War II. It was published in 1995, but it has the U.S. government assassination plots list. This is not us. This is Blum talking. And he lists over 30 different places where the U.S. Has played a particular role in going in and trying to make sure the regime that was in power, or the government in power, was friendly to it.
Oh, kind of like what we see in Venezuela today?
Yeah. You took the words right out of my mouth. And he mentions, I just want to mention some of the ones that are African related that he mentions. He mentions 1957 when Gamal Nasser, president of Egypt, these are either, he says, attempted overthrows or attempted assassinations, or actually successful ones. He mentions Lumumba. We all know about Patrice Lumumba.
Right.
He has the date, it's 1961. He mentions Fidel Castro in the 1960s. Many attempts, he writes, on his life, and we know about that. He mentions in 1967, this is all Blum from his book Killing Hope. He mentions in 1967 Che Guevara, the Cuban leader, he calls him. And 1970, this is somebody else, Allende, president of Chile, he mentions. So some of these he mentions are not dealing with Africa, but they're still important to give us a sense of how, neocolonialism works, or how the idea of getting a friendly regime in for the West,
right.
So that, you can do its bidding. And he mentions Gaddafi. Now, this was before the the killing of Gaddafi, he mentions these attempts from 1980 to 1986. Because, see, this book was published in 1995. And then he mentions in 1991 Saddam Hussein. Again, that was before, a lot of things kicked off. But if you want to look at this, somebody else did a work on looking at some of the attempted overthrows and assassinations and all of that.
And I think that's important. And I think it more or less highlights the importance of what we talk about, how we identify capitalism as our enemy, because clearly we see the capitalist class, the imperialists, will scour the world over to seek to exploit large groups of people, exploit the land base for those resources. What we see going on in Venezuela today, putting in a puppet regime or acknowledging who you want to acknowledge as president, even though they weren't even democratically elected.
They weren't even elected.
Wasn't even elected.
You
but
just say you want somebody else in there. Now, okay.
Right.
That's a whole different extent of that reality. But another thing that people ask sometimes, Melvin, we know this a lot, is okay, so it's capitalism, but what does that have to do with racism? But, what we talk about is people who are in control, the ruling class, is going to push themselves as the most beautiful, the most superior, the most intelligent.
Sure.
So those in power will push that idea. So you got predominantly for many, many years, people looking up to European as the ruling power, the European being the ruling power, whether you talk about France, Germany, the U.S., or whatever. And so with the control of the media and all of that and spreading propaganda, you don't have to hit anybody over the head. Little children still choosing white dolls as being the most beautiful. It's because the images that you get are images that don't look like you at all. So, the idea that I must be the greatest because everything that's touted as beautiful has long hair, it has this light skin, and, all of that. And this is how racism grows. The same thing about gender. Well, I think we have to stop now, don't we?
Yeah. So
Bring on our guest. Hello.
Hello.
Hey,
Hi.
how are you all doing?
Okay, how are you?
Good.
Melvin here with me this morning, and we've been having a good chat about just defining, trying to describe neocolonialism, but we know we wanted to bring you two on, right, Melvin?
Right. So we just want to introduce our guest today, Kim and Pa Juf out of Chicago, our Chicago Circle of the Pan-African Revolutionary Socialist Party. And today, again, we're talking about our enemy, capitalism, and all of its manifestations. And more specifically, what we wanted to talk to you about, Kim and Pa, was this whole neo-colonialist reality on the continent. And just had a couple of questions for you all, if you can indulge us. First question is, can you all please offer a few examples of how the neo-colonialism are operating on the continent today?
Neocolonialism came into being because Africans defeated colonialism. And they left in the creation of an empire building without a flag. And this is how neocolonialism works. It works on three different things. Political power after colonialism is given in the hands of the Africans in order for them to control the resources. And they managed to control the army, the police, and the intelligence. They managed to control the economic institutions and production that is completely controlled by private foreign capital, and leave the infrastructure in the hands of the indigenous people. They divided the trade unions, and any viable movement that is established. The objective was for neocolonialism is the absolute control control of the resources and create what you call a clientele state.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, for examples, immediately after colonialism was defeated, the French became very offensive, and de Gaulle created what you call the de Gaulle Pact. I'm going to give the French territories a flag, but I will control all the resources. When Sékou Touré refused, they walked in there. They did all kinds of stuff. They even took the lamps and what have you, because Sékou Touré wanted absolute independence and economic freedom, and to coin their own currency. So, example is like that. Now, immediately after Sékou Touré refused, Olympia, for example, of Togo, decided, you know what, I'm not going to leave completely, but I'm going to tell them that I want independence, but I want a control of the CFA, that is the currency of France. So, 1963, Olympia not being able to control the CFA, neo-colonialism had to kill Olympia, and by a legionnaire that they pay $630 to kill a president. That's just one. In 1962, for example, Modibo Keïta also wanted, to become absolute independent away from the currency that's controlled by French, which is in 68, Modibo Keïta was overthrown. January 1966, they took up offensive on Central African Republic. January 4th. The January 3rd, they went into what you call Burkina Faso and overthrew Upper Volta. 1972, for example, Martin Kérékou, who was a security guard, also tried to overthrow. What I'm saying is that the strategy has been to control all the territories. The last 50 years, you have 67 coups in 26 countries in Africa.
And that's sad. That is horrible.
Yeah. And all of those 61% are French territories. As we speak now, 14 African countries under the French are now under French and de Gaulle Pact. Togo, just like Haiti, is still in debt to the French government. 8% of the territories under French, which is 14 of them, making $500 billion a year are under control of the French. Which is why the French would say, if they lose Africa, French will resort to a 14th or third world country. So that's what neocolonialism does.
That's why he's been over there. The president. That's why the president has been over there, in recent times in several different French-speaking African countries.
Yeah. So can you imagine countries paying what you call colonial debt? Just like after slavery, they forced Haiti to pay $50 billion to the French who used to own slaves. And there is no difference in terms of what Africa is facing. So neocolonialism, now I think when Africans talk about neocolonialism, we should also remember that imperialism was defeated under colonialism in order for them to strategize a new way of exploiting Africa, which is neocolonialism. It tells us positively that we are weakening imperialism in different ways. And now to fight for the sustainment of the continent of Africa, need to defeat neocolonialism, and retrieve our resources in order to consolidate the continent. Enough for the diaspora to boldly come in and out, and then we all work together and build a free and a united Africa.
That's the solution there.
Yes, that's the solution, because we can't let them do what they're doing. The presidency, the leadership is in such control that neocolonialism allows them to do everything, run everything, but the resources are extracted on a daily basis outside of the continent of Africa. So neocolonialism today has established a new class reality, or if you want to call it a pseudo-class reality, where the comprador bourgeoisie and all those leaders think that they own this, they own that, but they are not in control. They are only in control of institutions, and they are being directed what to do on a daily basis.
And that's why I like, what Kwame Nkrumah calls them, those pseudo bourgeoisie in Africa at home. The true class enemy. Because you have to deal with them, and get rid of that puppetry class that is allowing or prostituting, their country.
Yeah, and they are afraid. They are scared, which is why Lawrence openly one time said that the United States government openly asked him to leave the government. And he said, I was told by the United States to leave. If you don't leave, they will kill you. If you don't leave, they will kill you. Since 1960, that's why when Nkrumah wrote Neocolonialism in 1965, was warned by the government of the United States not to publish it. This is under Lyndon Johnson. 1966, Nkrumah was overthrown.
Oh, you
because
see,
he
that's...
refused to abide by the policy of Western imperialism.
And June Milne calls that the last straw that broke the camel's back when he published, neocolonialism.
Yes. He was deliberately asked not to publish it to expose what they're doing. It's the same thing with Modibo Keita. It's the same thing with Modibo Keita. The same issue that Modibo Keita raised on the colonialism moving into neocolonialism is the same issue that Gaddafi was killed. By the fact that I want my currency, Gaddafi was killed the same way that Saddam Hussein was killed because they wanted to transfer the oil money, not from the dollar, but from something else. Yeah, and the struggle for the CFA right now across the continent is that 80% of those 14 French territories, 80% of their resources are in the French treasury in the bank. Even when they take that money and they put it in a Wall Street or whatever, they're not even exposing to these countries who owns what and what percentage they are getting from the banks.
Yes.
And then when you look at a place like Senegal, all the presidents, the French will give them what you call the black box, with millions and millions of dollars for them to spend at their own discretion. So with that black box and millions of CFAs, they take it into the country, they bribe the politicians, they bribe the leadership, and that's how neocolonialism operates in Africa.
Oh, that's real good information. Thank you for explaining us how it's working on the continent right now. What do you all identify as major strategy and tactics, or what do you think we should adopt with regards to fighting against neocolonialism on the continent?
Well, I'm going to start with a quote by Nkrumah. Nkrumah says, "A state in the grip of neocolonialism is not master of its own destiny." I'll say that is true for Africa. That is true for us in the Caribbean. That's true for us throughout the African world. So in terms of strategy, political education. Political education for me is the key. A political education that's rooted in Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism that is the total liberation and unification of Africa under an all-African scientific socialist government. We are African people. Understand and know our history. Be proud of that history. Create our own schools with a Pan-African curriculum at the focus. And in that Pan-African curriculum, We don't start with slavery. No, we go back to our royal heritage. Our royal heritage where we fought and won battles. We fought and won the battle against colonialism. We fought and won battles with the Zulu nations in South Africa, the battles against the Arabs. We had our own African male and African female queens who were leaders of armies and won those wars. Be united. Speak and act monolithically. Our people, Africans, are really afraid of that word unity. We always say, we're not monolithic. You may not be monolithic in your idea and thought, but when it comes to us advancing and achieving true liberation, we have to think unified. We can't think individually. So be united. Deal effectively with traitors that betray the revolution. PRSP has been talking about know the enemy and know the enemy within. Understand imperialism in all its forms and watch out for the foreigners, the fakers, the fools that come in and destroy what we try to build. Understand power is what we're after. We're not after integration. I want to say we're not even out for equality because that's been something that's been loosely held as a carrot over our heads. But when it comes to power, first and foremost, we want power over our land. Africa is our land. If you are black, of black descendants, Africa is your land. In America, the land belongs to the Native Americans. In the islands, we fought valiantly there for our freedom and liberation, but the land originally belonged to the Native Americans. Power over our land, power over our resources. Secondly, power over our minds to understand who we are, control over everything that will propel us forward from the use of our resources, how we use technology, how we broker that to advance. Finally, production and reproduction of real life. Create future revolutionaries in each and every home. We are instilling our history, pride for ourselves, where we were and how we thought as that family unit, as that family structure that developed into that community. And that community structure, that is where our support lies. And finally, build from within. Create our own businesses. Create our own farms. Produce our own food. Support us. Support Africans. Support everything it is that we're doing. Build our resources. Man, and be responsible for our own businesses and help each other.
And Kim, you
That's
know,
what
that's some good. You started off by talking about political education and just what you have been talking about, you and Paju, and what we try to do as Pan-African Revolutionary Socialist Party and many Pan-African revolutionary organizations. The key is political education, and that's the way you're going to get organization and begin to secure your land base back. And so, you know, we are so thankful that you could join us and teach us and share your knowledge with us. And that is directly, isn't it, Melvin? Political education.
Absolutely. Appreciate it.
We appreciate it. We're going to have to end, but we thank you. This is Kim and Paju from the Pan-African Revolutionary Socialist Party. And we are so happy and proud.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you all. Thanks for calling in.
Thank you so much.
Never.
And please,
Thank
I
you.
hope you come back and join us too. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
Yes, anytime.
All right. Forwards ever.
So,
Oxford never, bro. Bye-bye.
so we say now we are thankful for them, Melvin. They did a good job for us on neocolonialism. We hope you'll join us next month when we discuss the third truth that we stand by, because we dealt with identity, we dealt with enemy.
Right.
And next time, our objective is Pan-Africanism. So Kim and Paju got into that some, and we're going to do more of that next time. Meanwhile, please leave comments on our website, prsponline.org. Like us on soundcloud.com. Visit us on YouTube. Like us on Facebook. Remember,
Organization is the key. Join us or any other Pan-African Revolutionary Socialist organization. A union of African socialist states is on the horizon.
all right.
The new name in the 21st century of imperialism is really globalization. And when you think about that, when you read about that, when you study about that, globalization really means the globalization of capital. You don't hear people talking about the globalization of labor. But you know, working people all around the world have more in common with each other than they have with their own so-called leaders or the rulers, the ruling class, that is, of those societies. So people should globalize resistance. Globalize, and that means globalization.
Some kids get bombs for breakfast and blow it away on their birthday. Ask the little orphan boy on Iraqi soil what he think about the USA. Today was the worst day of his life. Uncle Sam killed both his parents. His village was burned to the ground and they left him and his little brother to perish. Cause they want the oil in the soil. Like vampires, they come for blood. In the name of freedom and justice, nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. First they send the soldiers, then come McDonald's and Coca-Cola. Toxic Western culture. Once they take over, it's over. Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Halliburton, 7-Up, Walmart, Exxon. Who cares if you get stepped on? Get stepped on. In the name of progress, they business has no conscience. All they want is profits. It's obvious in Africa. It's obvious in Mexico. It's obvious in Cuba. It's obvious in Palestine. American invasion, foreign occupation, covert operation, oppressive domination. Resist. 2012 is approaching. No food on the shelves and the system is broken. It's out of order. We out of water and out of time. Out of my mind. Out of prime time with the propaganda. Make you wanna snap, make you pop the hammer. Call it what it is, use proper grammar. Land grab, call that gentrification. Microchip identification. That's just fear and intimidation. 9 o'clock news interpretation. Birth of a nation that's got nothing to lose but our chains. Got nothing to use but our brains. Stop following rules and let's change the game. Resist. Blackwater, 4 trucks, 8-pack, Starbucks, IMF, Chevron. Who cares if you get stepped on? Get stepped on. In the name of progress, they business has no conscience. All they want is profits. It's obvious in Africa. It's obvious in Mexico. It's obvious in Cuba. It's obvious in Palestine. American invasion, foreign occupation, covert operation, oppressive domination. Resist. These are the times, baby. These are the times. See, never